Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore storytelling on film, as well as interviews with industry professionals who work in film, television, and theater. I want to welcome to the show Patricia White, who is a professor and chair of the Department of Film and Media Studies at Swarthmore College and the author of Women's Cinema, World Cinema Projecting Contemporary Feminisms, which was released in 2015, and Uninvited Classical Hollywood Cinema and Lesbian Representability, which came out in 1999. She is also co-author with Timothy Corrigan of the film textbook, The Film Experience. Her essays have appeared in Cinema Journal, Film Quarterly, GLQ, Screen, and in numerous edited collections. White serves on the board of the nonprofit feminist media arts organization Women Make Movies, the advisory board of Film Quarterly, and is a member of the editorial collective of the feminist film journal Camera Obscura. And last year, she wrote a book on the film we're discussing today, as well as the book she wrote on it, Rebecca, which was released in 1940, which was directed, of course, by Alfred Hitchcock. Patricia, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for the invitation.
I really had a fun time reading this book. It's a great, really interesting and enriching experience from, of course, knowing the movie. So I really enjoyed it. But before we jump into more on the book, I just wanted to learn a little bit more about your backstory. So when did you initially get interested in working in film studies?
I was a film fan in high school, but I was not in a big city. I was in the middle of Arizona. I had very little access to new films, so I kind of watched anything that was on TV. And one of the things about Rebecca in particular is that it was really like an film for me. It was on heavy rotation, so I saw it. I saw it then, and my mom loved it. So I knew I loved, classical Hollywood, and I was just super eager to see everything else I could possibly see. And then when I got to college, it was the years of very robust film society programming. So we had all kinds of film societies, and I ran a feminist film society that was committed to women directors. And that sort of became a research interest of mine, alongside, the Hollywood, I guess, woman's picture for a long time.
And so when you were in high school, I imagine if you're watching a lot of classic Hollywood films, is this also when you really started to explore Hitchcock's filmography in general?
Sure, like whatever was on. So I feel like, it was like Lady Vanishes. I feel like the color, it was when Vertigo and the other films that were sort of tied up in the estate were not available and not in circulation. Right. So I really vividly remember when Vertigo came back out in the re-release, and I saw that, I think, at the Ziegfeld in New York. It was just a totally mind-blowing experience. I think that was college. So yeah, I was always interested in Hitchcock, but you just didn't have access to that many. I think you had Notorious. Interesting, you had some of the women-driven right. Hitchcock films. And I guess it was much later that I saw more of the British ones. Yeah, I remember Lady Vanishes was on TV, but not all of them. So it's been a lifelong thing. And then writing this book, which was about kind of going back to this early love of Rebecca, kind of put me in the Hitchcock, what I would call ACA fan, the academic fan community, which is huge. So I've been really enjoying, more of the sort of social lives of Hitchcock fandom in the last couple of years. So sadly, I was not able to attend, but was able to give a paper remotely at a conference solely dedicated to Rebecca that just happened in Cornwall, where Daphne Du Maurier, summered and lived and wrote the novel Rebecca, as well as a number of the other novels that, Hitchcock also adapted Jamaica Inn, which was set there, and she wrote there. So that was I was sad to miss. It was COVID, travel problems, but I'm glad that was because the film had its 80th anniversary during COVID. So by the time they could finally schedule it, it was the 82nd.
Right, right. And did your feelings about Rebecca evolve or over time? Did you just initially take to it immediately? Do you recall your first viewing?
I always loved Rebecca, and I always loved what I would think would be like, I would just say the atmosphere of Rebecca, and that's, the mise en scène, and also just the way that magical coastline was evoked with, Hollywood smoke and mirrors, like almost literally, and some location shooting, but it was in Carmel, it was California coast. But I think what it was just the absolute sumptuousness of Hollywood production, black and white production, with this amazing atmospherics from Daphne Du Maurier on the one hand, and then Hitchcock on the other. So you have this, and that's a lot what the book is about, is just these kind of three brilliant stylists
Right.
who were as much committed to like everything that's going on around the story as to the story. Or I think with Hitchcock, maybe everything that's going around the story, like in service to a feeling about the story, right? So
Right.
there's definitely momentum there. But yeah, so I think that is a good way to get hooked on the movies, is just like at their most expensive, most brilliant people involved. I'm not saying it was a production that was not, troubled or couldn't have been different, but I think that that spell of Hollywood is really well cast by the movie. And I have Judith Anderson as Mrs. Danvers back there. And I guess that's what I mean by spell. It's really like, come into the movies and we'll show you what we can do with,
She's
black
checking
and white
in on us there behind.
Yep.
We better not piss her off. We'll try.
No.
One thing I must admit, I have actually only seen Rebecca twice. Just before speaking to you, I watched it again right before I started reading the book. So just in the last week or so, I watched it again. And you pointed out something that actually hadn't dawned on me, was that the Joan Fontaine character doesn't have a name. And you referred to her as I. Was that something that you picked up on early on?
It's hard to know, because I do feel like I identified with that character so closely that I'm not sure I noticed the first time out. And you're sort of saying, you can watch the movie without noticing it.
I didn't notice
it's
at
a
all.
movie.
Yeah.
There's a couple funny places where, it's like, ooh, what an interesting name. When she first, shows it to Maxim, or she gets, somebody at a dinner party forgets her name because she's so forgettable. And, there's a little joke there. And of course, Hitchcock enjoyed that. But I think I read the novel almost immediately after seeing the movie, in my adolescence, and the novel, She Has No Name. And it's pretty intense. I mean, it's a first person narration. So, but, inevitably somebody refers to the character. So it's a pretty tough trick to pull off and not have people notice on print or on screen.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you didn't write that in the book, I think it would have totally went over my head, because then they're referring to her as Mrs. De Winter, right? Naturally, she's the second wife, but she's not the first. Mrs.
So
it's
the naming is very complicated, and then of course Rebecca is everywhere. That name is everywhere. It's the name of the movie. It's, written in this script that you see very vividly, on the flyleaf of a book, but also, she has her monogram everywhere. And so there's a sort of irony. You never see her, but her name's everywhere, and you almost never leave the heroine. But her name is, we don't know.
Yeah, that R is the Rebecca R is on so many objects inside the house. One thing about the photography, I mean, it's so expressionistic. I mean, every object on the wall casts a shadow, like everything casts a shadow. Now, do you think that was that just like a Gothic trope, or was that meant to be a visual motif for like the ghost of Rebecca, like her shadow is everywhere?
I think it's well, both. I think it's the emerging Gothic motif and, kind of expressionist kind of practice with lighting. But yes, I think very much intentionally, Rebecca, there's, a Rebecca theme in the score, and that's normal for those kind of orchestral Hollywood scores, that there would be themes for particular characters, and even this absent character has one. And I think you can think of lighting design and the architecture of the house, which has a room dedicated to Rebecca, that like each thing does have a Rebecca correlation. And I think, yes, you're always meant to see the Judith Anderson character, Mrs. Danvers, is always kind of looking off screen. There's off-screen space as Rebecca. So yeah, she's everywhere. And I think the photography, just to give credit to George Barnes, who was the cinematographer, he did win the Oscar for it. I think he trained to a certain extent Greg Toland, so that kind of precision and depth and use in the use of moving camera, all of this, he was a master craftsman. And it's early noir, so the Gothic kind of goes one direction, where there's these certain film noir that have female protagonists, and Gaslight would be the next, I think, really good one. But there's plenty. And it's 1940, so Citizen Kane, which, as I talk in the book, has definitely, I think, borrows from Rebecca, and all of these other noir films, are still to come. So it's pretty notable.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up noir, because I was curious if you felt this belongs in the noir camp, or do you feel that it's more Gothic horror that sort of was a precursor and inspired noir in a sense? So what do you think?
I think the latter, probably. It's a very odd film in that it's totally contemporary. And the novel had just come out, and the novel's contemporary. It's set in the late 30s. There are some, sort of historical things like the rise of fascism that clearly, sorry for the pun, cast a shadow over the proceedings, but it doesn't feel contemporary. It feels, like it's in this kind of timeless, ghostly, otherly Hollywood space. So I think it doesn't quite have the criminal underworld noirish connotations, but I think if Rebecca had been cast, she would kind of look a lot like, I don't know, Jean Tierney and Laura, or she would have a femme fatale kind of quality. We hear about her laughing and her duplicitousness and her long black hair, and she has that quality. But I think it's a very interesting way that it pushes back on or lays down a place for film noir ideas and tropes that's in a domestic place, and it's a domestic place that's uncanny and strange. And again, Citizen Kane really draws on that, whereas you'll have many noir films that just avoid the home completely. And of course, these aren't really homes. These are whatever, castles and haunted spaces,
prisons.
but prisons, exactly. Yeah, I mean the beginning of Kane, which I think quotes the beginning of Rebecca. You go up and over into this place. So I do think it's a gender equation that should be kept in mind about how the 40s develop, because the audience is supposedly female. All of the real all-American men are at war, and then you have these criminal lowlifes in the noir films, and these threatening husbands who are often like foreigners or coded in this way as kind of also not quite red-blooded American males. in the Gothics. It's just there's a lot to look at outside of just Hitchcock's oeuvre, which also gives a lot of interesting intertexts with Rebecca.
Oh, absolutely. And when you mentioned the connection with Citizen Kane, and that is another film that I've seen probably only a couple of times. So I'm actually sort of an amateur at both of these movies, I'd suppose. An amateur viewer, because it's certainly, these are the kind of movies you want to see again and again because they offer so much. And yeah, now it's so obvious. I mean, the ending of Kane with the burning of the rosebud is exactly the same as the burning of the red pillow. And even as recent as a film also I'd only seen once was Phantom Thread that you mentioned, the Paul Thomas Anderson film. I was like, yeah, I mean, it strongly resembles Rebecca. So this film certainly inspired a lot of movies, and there's been remakes, there's been television versions, there's been sort of different takes on it, as I mentioned. So why do you think it has had such a long lasting impression, both the film and the book? What is it about this story that you think is so resonant?
I do think that the sort of, I call it female Gothic, or it's called female Gothic, but in a way, a lot of Gothic is female. There's always this kind of female presence, often the protagonist who's, kind of in this state of dread, and we identify with them. But there's also usually some past or hidden secret that has to do with a woman, and usually a victimized woman, but maybe because of that victimization, she also has this power from beyond the grave. So I think the story, which, in some ways is an outright ripoff of Jane Eyre, but also of the story of Bluebeard, where the wife, marries this man who she knows very little about, gets invited to his home. There's a locked room, finally finds the key to the room. And that's where she finds, I won't say what. So it's a really, and then I think psychologically, it's a really primal story about female isolation in marriage, where you kind of leave, so I guess middle-class marriage and feudal marriage going way back, where you leave, a home that's dominated by your father into a home that's dominated and ruled by a husband.
Right.
And you have no real sense of like what you're supposed to do there. And then of course the class connotations of most of these Gothics are in castles or whatever. So there's this, it's about growing up. It's about like not knowing how to be an adult. So that's really primal. But then the way that Daphne Du Maurier reintroduced all that in the 30s in the novel, just, not only spurred this film and imitators of the film, but like paperback Gothics, that story gets told again and again and again. And, I think it's there in something like Twilight, where you have kind of a zero of a narrator. You have this completely unformed placeholder for a female reader, but really for any reader, because being incompetent and and not knowing where you're supposed to turn or whether something is frightful or desirable, and feeling that everything's fraught that way, anyone can identify with it. And then putting that, in a place where these other characters have kind of seemingly unlimited power. Right. So the vampires, or the super wealthy aristocracy, or the dead have this, it's quite formidable. So I think that all of those psychological reasons may make it a story that sticks. And then it's Du Maurier's scenario Selznick's insistence on, just making it sumptuous and being faithful to Du Maurier, and then Hitchcock's, like, he really is good at putting us in the place of the person who knows nothing. And, one misstep could, just bring on crushing embarrassment, which is what happens in the beginning of Rebecca, but also, death. He uses that all the time, that kind of walking that tightrope of the unknown.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to, something that you pointed out, that one of the many things I found really appealing was, because I agree with everything you're saying about how much the people can relate to the film and how it's always like universal and relevant, and it's a very ambiguous film too. I mean, it not everything is spelled out. People probably take away all kinds of different interpretations about all the various motives and things that happen. And one thing that that you pointed out was that, of course, we never see Rebecca, but yet Rebecca haunts the film, and in a way, you're left thinking about Rebecca the most. And for me, anyways, and one thing you said in the book, I'll just find this in regard to Maxim's monologue towards the end, when you said, for all that the confession scene is the payoff, Maxim's narration of his reasons for murdering Rebecca are curiously uncompelling. She slept around. She faked their happy marriage. We don't have the whole picture. She told him things he would never tell a soul, even I. She was not even normal. It isn't a queer identity that is revealed. Rebecca is a queer threat because she can win the game of sorry, this is a tough word. Heteropatriarchy. There we go.
Right.
That I found really appealing because, again, I only seen it twice. And when he was talking about the fact that he hated her so much that she married him, and then immediately said that she didn't love him and mocked him, and there was nothing he could do about it because he would hate to be embarrassed that about the fact that they would have to get a divorce, and so she basically took control. But when you had pointed out the line of what he says, and I watched that scene again, and he says, she told me things that I would never tell a soul. So then I started thinking, well, perhaps he isn't the most, people say all kinds of things that they maybe don't truly mean. I mean, why would you not want to tell your current wife everything that this woman told you? So I'm thinking, did you really hate her that much? Is she really as bad? Is it the cheating? But this element that you speak of, that he couldn't control her, perhaps, and because he was a patriarchal world, and that is where his hate came from, because everyone loves this woman. How could everyone love her so much but you? So this is, and I took his word for it at first, but then when you pointed that out, I was like, yeah, that's interesting. So I was curious. I was curious what you thought. I mean, there are tons of possibilities. I mean, do you think it was more about the fact that he just hated the fact that she kind of took control of the household, or did he maybe think that she was gay? I know you're saying that isn't the case, but
well, I do think that's the case. I think she's queer, in the sense that, like, the things that she did clearly are a threat to his masculinity. And I'm really interested in the lesbian subtext, but I don't think we can just say, oh, that was the unspeakable thing, because if you don't speak it, it could be, as you say, all these other things. So I think it's not, she can't be pinned down. She plays a game that he can't win at. And, we use the term patriarchy and now heteropatriarchy, but the movie is very clear about it, that his name is Maxim de Winter, and that name and the name of the house, Manderley, are patriarchal inheritances. And she threatens, in his narration, to have a child who he's not the father of, and allow that bastard child to inherit Manderley. So that's sort of provokes him to rage on that specific count. So I think, yes, she cannot be controlled. She's a female force that's uncontrollable, and part of not depicting her, but I think everyone understood that not depicting her made that possible because of all the ways that female representations in classical Hollywood and other visual, cultures can sometimes pinpoint, like, okay, we can control her through lighting and gels and costuming and, whatever. But if we can't even see her, we can't have visual control.
Yeah.
And I also think what's fun about his, big confession is that it is so mixed up with Hollywood's own sort of self-importance about being its own moral arbiter, and the controversy around censorship. So there's no way that we could say Laurence Olivier, and this character, outright murdered her. So we have to kind of fudge the cause of death. And by fudging the cause of death, you then fudge the motive of death. And I think you're right. Then you start to think,
he shoots her, right? In the book, he just
shoots
outright,
her.
There's no accident.
No accident. And so here it's like, well, maybe she fell, and he's like, I must have swooned for a moment. And you're like, what are you doing swooning? You're like the hero. So there's all of these ways in which it's incoherent. And, that is one of the payoffs of Hollywood, of film noir with its ambiguity, and then censorship and its and censorship and its ambiguity, which is that you can't really translate it into like, this is the secret, but that secretiveness is going to be the downfall of them all, really. So
I think it worked. I think it worked to their advantage to have to censor it, because when you pointed that out, that he says he hates her, but then he says, she told me things I would never tell a soul. And when I went back and watched that monologue again, I was like, okay, well, how do I know he's necessarily telling the truth? I mean, when he says he in a daze I must have hit her, I mean, maybe he's lying. Maybe he just outright threw her head against the wall, it's like, I don't know how. I can only take his word for it, right? So I thought they handled that quite well. I thought that was quite clever.
No, I think so too. Like, it's one of those times when, like, the censorship kind of, the same thing happens in Suspicion, which is not as good a movie, but since it's a Hitchcock thing, it's even more clear that the husband is, has murderous designs on his current wife, also played by Joan Fontaine again. So you're just like, and you're meant to be like, no, he was, you can't really lay it to rest. So that's, and I think that's one of the reasons why, the theme of return is there in the book, in the opening line, and Selznick, I think, wisely and very fussily, worked on that opening voiceover to say, last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. And that's just, for any film buff, a great setup for like, yep, gotta watch it again.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And as you said, and then right after that, she goes, but you could never go there again. And then we're like, well, it's all, then it's gone, but it's haunting her. That's it's haunted everyone for 80 years, because you gotta keep going back to Manderley, i.e. the film or the book, because nothing is really, that's the kind of films I like, not when things are not just so spelled out. Like this story really involves the audience into different possibilities behind the psychology of all the characters. The relationship with Maxim and as Joan Fontaine is also really appealing, because it's really not the most romantic, so you get the you I'm asking myself, why is he marrying her? And I think that when she says to him later, oh, you married me because they can't gossip about me, and he even says to her, don't ever turn 36, and so
Right.
he sort of saw how innocent she was and saw that he could control her because she was, basically a girl, not quite, not, just going into, becoming a woman. So, do you think then that he felt he could control her where he couldn't control Rebecca? And so she was sort of like a safe choice for him?
I absolutely, and it's as you said, he's got this paternal relationship to her, and obviously Olivier is dashing, and he's younger than the TV versions kind of cast it right. Like he's wealthy, he's older, he has this kind of fatherly appeal, but
Right.
in this Rebecca, you have to have both. She has to be completely bland, but also glamorous. And he has to be, defined by his wealth and his title, but also glamorous. So there's a really interesting way in which the romance is underwritten, but but present because of just its Hollywood stardom. So I think that's another way in which it's like effective as a romance, is like, oh, he would pick me and I could be me, any viewer, because exactly what he wants is her unremarkableness. So there's just an opening for fantasy there. But yes, I think he's looking for something that's to be controlled.
Mhm.
And she is disappointingly meek, and her I love the heroine, but she's she goes along with the cover up. She thinks
Yes.
that's her role, to just be with him forever, and that's disappointing. But I think that's when you shift to the poignancy of Mrs. Danvers' story and why she gets the big operatic death scene. That they're pretty, by that point they're like, we've almost lost interest in the main couple, because the
Right.
real drama is around this house that represents Rebecca, this character Mrs. Danvers, who also represents Rebecca.
Right. Right. It also made me um think about what is it that I sees in him. I mean, because that's why it has a noirish appeal, because he is this guy who has so much. So is Joan Fontaine almost a take on a different version of a femme fatale, in the sense that
Yeah.
she wants what he has,
Right.
perhaps, right? But I again, I don't think it's that simple, because people are making her feel that she has, no value whatsoever, and putting her down, and criticizing her. Even the woman that you see her working for at the beginning. I mean, there's,
Right.
she treats her, that's where, of course, the class comes in. So they're sort
Mhm.
of making her feel that, well, only the truly worthy people can be with the
Right.
likes of a Mr. De Winter. So even that great POV shot, as you talked about in the book, as she's going into Manderley and through
Yeah.
the windshield, right? And as she's sort of, it's almost like she found gold, like
Right.
she's
Right.
so, just the expression on her face. So do you see it less about love and more about what it would mean for her personally
Like
to
a
be with
gold
someone
digger.
like that?
I think that would be a way that, Joan Harrison was a writer and, kind of coming into her own as a producer alongside Hitchcock. They both come together to Hollywood to make this movie. And she and Hitchcock wrote The First Treatment. And I think both of them wanted if not a gold digger, at least like a modern girl who
Right.
was very like interested in, or new woman who was, who was interested in, what she could, whether it was power or wealth or whatever.
Right.
But I think that the character is deliberately infantilized, and I don't think it's wrong to read it as the fantasy underlying it is to have access to all that. But the way to have access to it is through this, I think, more Rebecca than Maxim. She's sort of in love with this power of a kind of a femininity that's indomitable, that Rebecca represents, and that Danvers represents in Rebecca's absence. So in a way, the heroine is only recognized as a threat by Danvers. Danvers is the only one who wastes any time, being suspicious of her or gaslighting her or putting her down. And I think that that's the complicated sort of psychological equation, which is the sort of, Oedipal complex, complicated by the desire for the mother and the desire for the place of the mother, where, Rebecca can defeat Maxim, can defeat Manderley, because even if it burns to the ground, it's still going to be, the place that we come back to in our dreams. So,
of course,
so I think she's, but I really like what you're saying about, well, what if she were like slightly differently cast? Like, what if it were, Vivien Leigh, who also really wanted the lead and was,
I didn't know that. I know you mentioned that in the book.
Which is absurd. And, she really could not play this part because of just how Rebecca-ish she would come across. But it would be really interesting to think, and it's puzzling to me to think why Du Maurier creates such a kind of loser character in the heroine. And I think it's, in a weird way, like the previous the predecessors in literature, like Jane Eyre is really smart, and Jane Eyre is ambitious, and Jane Eyre does want things for herself. And in order to kind of update that story, I think Du Maurier recognizes that it's a losing battle for this young woman, that like the social structure is going to defeat her. And it's almost showing us the lesson of trying to, make that aristocratic world fulfill your fantasies. Like, time is over for that. So, and the kind of hand of, at least in the book, Maxim as an outright murderer is revealed. So
you also address class in the book, which was something I hadn't thought of until I read your book, and it's a good point, because you don't exactly know her.
That's right.
Her background, like she mentions that her parents were dead, but she works for this wealthy woman, and so the wealthy don't go work for the wealthy, right? So I guess it's like the wealthy for the ultra wealthy. So I assume she's middle or to lower class. So it sort of was infuriating me that Mrs. Van Hopper, who she works for, sort of puts her down so much, and when she finds out about the fact that they're going to get married, she's like, good luck, and
you haven't the slightest idea what it means to be a great lady.
It was driving. I mean, I love the performance from Florence Bates. I mean, it's incredible.
She's great.
Even her reaction when it was so real, when they say they're going to get married, and she just looks over at Joan Fontaine, and just a look of shock. I mean, it's like you. Yeah. It's funny, but it's both sad at the same time, because they're making this poor young woman feel that she's worthless, not just because of her whatever they think of her personality, but because I took it, and I shouldn't say I took it, because you helped me see that in the book, was that because she's not from money, do you
Right.
think it's more along those lines, or do you think it's also
Yeah.
just the way they felt about her personality? Or
I think it's again, it's sort of this literary tradition. And of course, the British class system is so much more, intricate than the American one. So when it gets translated, I think, probably Hitchcock would be kind of making it more modern and less about these old, kind of old money, if he had his druthers. But Selznick is like kind of in love with this, opulence of this kind of British, aristocracy that I think Hitchcock would probably be a little more pointedly critical of. So in the literary history, the governess, and she's not a governess, but she's a companion, which is similar. And then when Maxim gives his memorable proposal, "I'm asking you to marry me, you fool." And she's like, before that, she's like, do you want me to be your secretary or something? Like, not understanding like what he's asking. That would be somebody who had an education because they came from good, quote unquote, breeding, but had fallen onto hard times financially, so that the women would have to take jobs. So they would be school teachers. That's what happened. And so that, but I think it's much more prominent in literature than it probably, maybe it was, who knows, happening in the 19th century, but it became this figure of sort of transition in class where, like, oh, well, could women actually escape where they were born into in these hierarchies by their wits, or by their education, or by their autonomy? So that's why that the kind of the Jane Eyre, the governess, is such an interesting focus for the novel. But again, in the 20th century, like, why would she take that terrible job unless, and again, maybe you're right, maybe she does like want to go to Monte Carlo, maybe she is like reading more magazines than than we think, and has more of, she's more like the viewers of this film. But I think we're made to think that yes, she's put down because she's I think, interestingly, the American British thing comes in another way, which is the Americans are vulgar. So the Florence Bates character understands that what royalty is, but she doesn't know how to, or aristocracy is, but she doesn't know how to behave. So in fact, the younger woman has breeding that Maxim can recognize, has good manners, and in a way, so she is recognized for being British, and therefore he can see something that Mrs. Danvers Mrs. Van Hopper doesn't see.
Well, I love that. I love that moment where, because Mrs. Van Hopper, like, later you see she's like writing him letters, and like, and she's even, she's talking when they first encounter Maxim, she's talking his ear off, and then the littlest thing that Joan Fontaine says, she's like, stop. Like, later, she's like, I forget exactly what she says. She's like, men don't like that. But yet
you were you were just a tad forward with him. Yeah, you're just like,
yeah. Meanwhile, she's like going on and on. So she clearly lacked the introspection.
And Hitchcock, I think he had a blast with that character. And again, I do think he said that the story was lacking in humor. I think he also really likes George Saunders' character as the cousin.
Because I love it.
Jack
I could listen
Favell,
to that guy talk all day. Just
his voice, amazing. Have you seen Cat People?
I haven't. I've been meaning to.
Yeah, really good. And a short watch. It's like, 70 minutes, because it was a lower bill B. But there's the guy who plays the sort of suspicious and smarmy psychiatrist in that is actually George Saunders' brother, and he has a similar like totally silky voice. So
wow.
It's interesting.
Check that out.
It's a fun little noir factoid.
I'm gonna check that out, because I've been meaning to. I'm glad that you brought up the point about Hitchcock saying that the film lacked humor, which he said to Truffaut and Hitchcock Truffaut in the book. Do you, because I feel it has humor, so I don't know what you like. Why do you think he succeed? I wonder why he thought that. What did you think?
I think it was about his kind of struggle with Selznick. Selznick being really literal minded, Selznick wanting things to be, there in the mise en scène and less kind of in the direction. Although Selznick really appreciated all of the super cinematic stuff that Hitchcock did, like the moving camera in the confession scene that, shows us what shows us emptiness.
Right. So they didn't have to go to a flashback. Right.
So I do think, and I feel like in a way, I do think Mrs. Danvers is so over the top, evil that she's campy. So there's a little humor there. I think there's humor in just how many times poor Joan Fontaine trips or slips or loses direction or blurts the wrong thing or, So I think he gets it in there. I think we lose it a little bit. I do think the film gets slow. And in the sort of during the investigation part, and the Jack Favel character, George Sanders, is the only place that kind of livens up that.
Yeah. I also really was laughing at his sister.
Beatrice. Yeah.
Beatrice, played by Gladys Cooper, and her husband, Major Giles Lacey, Nigel Bruce played.
Yeah.
Because they were also really funny. There was one line after they meet her, and then I'm not quoting exactly, but Laurence Olivier asked Joan Fontaine, how did it go? And they were like, well, she was expecting someone a little more sophisticated. I was like, oh my God.
And she almost steals the show too. Like, what a supporting cast. And it's interesting because they were, everyone was British except for Joan Fontaine, who, whose mother was British. And so, had kind of raised her and her sister, Olivia de Havilland, to have these, fancy accents and to act British. So, but just historically, it was a really interesting moment because the war had started like the day that the film was supposed to
yes, you mentioned that in the book.
In start production. And it did start just a few days after. And of course, America didn't enter the war then, but we had this kind of, like support the British allies. But so it was an interesting, kind of little island of Brits, and Hitchcock had just arrived. So it was, he kind of was playing with all these people who, like him, I think had left the sort of limited horizons of the British film industry for Hollywood, where they were like, yay, people who can speak, these trained character actors and also lead actors. So that was another part of the formula of Rebecca being so successful.
What do you think of Olivier's performance in this?
I think he's great. I think he has to be sexy in a way, because he's distracted. Like, I think he's kind of great because he feels like he's not super into the role. So that makes it seem like he's not super into her. So her paranoia about, like, is his dismissiveness is there, but then he plays it in this kind of spoiled and bratty, but also broody Heathcliff way. So I think he's great. I think he's fun.
I mostly agree. I think the as you said, the brooding and the distance, and I thought he nailed all of that really well. Even his eyes sort of had a dead quality to them because he's so tortured and haunted. I thought he did that quite well. However, it was the scenes where he had to get angry, not necessarily had to get angry, but he was portraying that when they're investigating what happened on the boat, and they call him up and he's about to blurt out that he did it, and then Joan Fontaine faints. I felt, if you, I felt that he really sort of just faked the anger, which was
Yeah.
more from the British tradition, was to, he really believed not in doing things realistically. He felt that
Right.
you should just, if you can make it look real,
Hmm.
but it's easier now to sort of pinpoint those
Yeah.
styles back then. So I just felt at times when he was being angry, he was showing it as opposed to truly
To feeling it. Yeah.
having it. Yeah. And even
Yeah.
the scene where she comes with in the white dress, and he tells her take it off because
Yeah.
Rebecca,
Yeah.
as we know, Rebecca had worn it. Just he if you look at his, I
Hmm.
just felt if you looked at his expression, he was showing the sort of
Yeah.
how dare you. He kind of like he does physical things, like he puts his hand on his
Yeah.
head. But if you actually look at his expression, this is just my
Yeah.
opinion, it's kind of like, oh, he makes a bit of a face or something. I don't know
Yeah.
if you felt that or.
I think that's a really interesting, and in fact, I think that's really good for the character, because the whole point of this character is that he's, or that archetypal character of the husband who you can't quite tell, does he love you or hate you, is that he's mercurial in that way. Like, does he mean it?
Yeah,
Is he,
yeah,
so in that way, I think it's effective that you feel like, well, is it all about appearances? And
right,
when he gets angry at the at the inquest, I'm really angry at him because he's privileged enough to think that even if he does get angry and say whatever, of course I
yeah,
killed her, she was
right.
that he would get away with it. And
That's true.
that's what the cousin Jack Favel says. He's like, you guys are really, cozy. Like, it's the guy who's investigating and the doctor. They're all going to protect him because of his,
Yeah, they're like instantly on his side.
yeah. And I think that that makes him unsympathetic, that he's so devil may care about the consequences. And I think it's good for him to be unsympathetic for the formula. But I also think, again, that I saw this movie, that's when seeing it as a child or it's a young person, is kind of like, I can't imagine it any other way.
Right.
He does this painful hammy thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but it's true.
sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just, it's not somebody that Hitchcock then was like, I'm going to work with,
Yeah,
he's not a Cary Grant. He doesn't have, yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. This is before the more Stanislavski based method
Yeah.
training was coming into America. So I know he was always in conflict with,
Yeah.
his views and their views. I think, like he certainly had a lot of great, strong qualities even on film. And I think he certainly evolved. I think he got a lot better on film.
Mhm.
I don't think, I don't know, maybe he just didn't tell anyone that he was sort of, he was sort of treating performances more realistically. Because I think by the time he got the Marathon Man, I mean,
Mhm.
he was very
Yeah.
different. Like he really
Yeah.
sort of evolved, I
Yeah.
find. Um,
I do think this role, I mean, he was interested in it in a way to, if he could get Vivian Leigh with it. So I don't think he was dismissive of the role, but I don't think he, he wasn't the lead.
right.
So there was a way in which he was arrogant in his approach to the part,
I see.
possibly.
I see. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that with him. I love Joan Fontaine though. I thought she was
Yeah.
fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
she is actually treating everything very realistically. I mean, she doesn't
Mhm.
she doesn't fake anything. I mean, everything that she's experiencing is so genuine, and so much of it is, as you said in the book, her watching and her that. And as an actor myself, that's difficult to do, and you just have to react to things that you're seeing
Yeah.
or hearing, even when she's hearing the monologue at the end. I thought she was really in Suspicion as well, which of course she won an
Yeah.
Oscar for, and she was nominated for this. I thought she was really, really, really good.
And she
I'm also,
surprised people. Yeah. And she
yeah,
surprised because there was, sort of, could she, I mean, it is such a hard role. Like, how can you be inconspicuous yet galvanizing, and like not too spunky?
it's very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And
very
she's
hard, but
pretty. And
she
so
really
it's
is.
it's
Yeah,
hard to play. And so I think there's that, perfect way to sort of play her as like pretty, but no one sees it. except for us, or
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. No, I thought she was wonderful. I'm actually really surprised that they got this through the production code, because the gay coded
Yeah.
moments, and then there's plenty of them. Of course, the obvious one is Mrs. Danvers showing the Rebecca's underwear,
The underwear. How can
and
you
the
even say
fur.
that line? Especially made for her by the nuns of St. Clair. It's just like,
Yeah. And
and
she was so great in it. I'm sorry, what's her name again? Who played
Judith
Mrs.
Anderson, yeah. And
Judith
she's a
Anderson.
big stage actress, yeah, who's like done, she was a Lady Macbeth. She was, she played
Yeah.
all of those super compelling characters. And the record with the production code office is very interesting, because they instantly were like, we can't deal with this property because he's a murderer and there's sex perversion. And I think maybe they exhausted them so much in the back and forth over making Olivier, sort of innocent of the crime, that they just let that scene go through, because that scene is just like it's
so
undeniably
obvious. Yeah, it's so it's so obvious. I really do wonder. I know that when I read, and you mentioned it as well in the book, when I read the biography on Joan Harrison that Christina Lane
it's a great
wrote.
book.
Really good book. If anyone hasn't read it, it's a biography of Joan Harrison, who co-wrote the screenplay for Rebecca, and she also co-wrote Suspicion and Foreign Correspondent, and worked with Hitchcock a lot. But she says, she had mentioned in the book, and I know you did as well, that Selznick was so angry that he wasn't even gonna. He was like, "Oh, well, I'll just release it without their approval." So I don't know how that would have went down, but
yeah. But he was at the peak, so I think he could, and that's the thing. It was Hollywood was self-regulating. Like at a certain point, they're like, we're not going to, torpedo this A-list, big money production that's going to be great for the industry, and it
Right.
had these literary props, and so it's also hypocritical, the production code
God,
office.
yeah. I know, when you read all that, the way they thought is just it's quite unbelievable. What do you think, am I wrong in saying that this is not talked about too much in Hitchcock's filmography? Do you think it doesn't get enough credit?
There, yes and no. I do think that there's a path of films that are kind of, because they're acknowledged as Rebecca's never going to be marginalized, because it won the Best Picture Oscar. None of his other films did that. It's kind of unavoidable in the 40s, but it is his first American film, and it's very much a Selznick film, like in terms of just having been publicized as the Gone with the Wind follow-up. And so I think, I would say, though, that the themes in the film and some of the things that are introduced in the film, like that mobile point of view shot,
Yes.
that there's just ways in which you can't, it's so thoroughly within the, canon, that you kind of can't avoid it. And I do think Hitchcock saying it's not a Hitchcock picture, maybe set certain critics who were really into valorizing him off the scent of Rebecca's importance for a while, so that Robin Wood initially really dismissed it, but had to kind of come back around and say that it was good. And you can't say that it's overlooked just because of its historical importance, but I do think that the Du Maurier and Selznick claims for authorship over the film put up a strong, fight with saying it's fully a Hitchcock, a key to Hitchcock themes, because there's other players there, as all of the movies have.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an odd quote to say, well, it's not a Hitchcock picture.
Yeah.
He did sorry to say, but he did seem to be a bit of a credit hog.
Right,
I mean, I
right.
could be, that's just my impression. I know some people have said that, but it's just, to me, it sounds, I mean, and I love Hitchcock movies, but I just thought that was such a, you know, arrogant thing to say, in other words, unless it's my stamp through and through, I can't
Yeah.
acknowledge anyone else, so it's not mine because other people worked on it. So it's, but that's all your movies, people worked on
Exactly. Yeah. And
it.
and of course he just was the master of interviews. Like, so he was
Yeah,
always trying to create, and it could be a red herring, like, or a MacGuffin, as all of his films have. He's directing the interview too, in a way.
yeah, exactly. But as you said, I mean, it certainly has a lot of his touches that we saw in a number of his films. The POV being, the most striking. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought as she's wearing the white dress and she's going down the staircase towards Olivier, and his back is to her, and he keeps cutting back and forth from her POV and then to a close up of
Yeah.
her, and it just gives this feeling of it's like no one's looking at her, no one's saying, "Oh, you look
Yeah.
gorgeous." You just like, it's
Right.
so unsettling, and then boom,
Right.
wrong choice.
That's right. No, and that is also, a little bit like mean. You were saying her performance is convincing. There is the lore around the film that he really did kind of treat her like Maxim treated her. Like, he isolated her. He made her feel like, am I doing this right? Is anybody looking at me? Am I, so whether he did that for kicks or for the performance, we don't know, but you kind of feel it there too. There's too many shots of her, kind of trying to attract the gaze.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to say, because I mean, that's like that's a little more on the lines of like what Kazan would do later, like some of the more Stanislavski based method based directors, where they would try to sort of have some kind of an atmosphere so that the whatever you were experiencing as the character, the actor was experiencing.
Right.
So the fact that he was doing that with her, but yet he said he would hate working with method trained actors like Clift. But then even Murray Saint is method trained and he loved her. So you don't really know how much of he's telling the truth or not, right? But then it's I guess it's hard to say. I actually didn't know that he wasn't so kind to her, as you mentioned in the book. That was another eye opener for me. So you can only speculate, as you said.
Right. She's not going to, tell tales or, I think she would say, I mean, she does say that it was hard, that he made her isolated from like all these British actors, and like there's some mean thing, he like had her come in for her birthday and no one showed up, or say just just terrible practical Hitchcock kinds of things.
Right.
But he also really devoted himself to getting that performance. And at a point when people weren't sure she could carry it off. So
so maybe he felt that was the only way he could, I suppose. I mean, it's hard to say. Something you brought up earlier was, the fact that as Joan Fontaine plays, that she stands by him even though she knows that he, whether it was accidental or not, killed Rebecca. Right. And then, as you pointed out in the book, she that whole investigation later, she's hardly even in it. I mean, she's just like, now it's like your job is done and the men will take over kind of thing. Did you ever give any thought as to why she was so loyal to this guy who she hardly knew that she married? I mean, what was it's hard to say, I suppose, but
I feel like that is the disappointment of the book, is that she's gives into that. I think unconsciously, and I feel like the whole story comes from like this kind of unconscious place, is that he's devoted to Rebecca forever and she's in it with him. Like that the story of Rebecca tormenting him has become her story as well. So she's like, so the romance of being like enthralled to this like dead woman, and this like story of female power, even if it can't be like, you know, I don't know, turned into like converting Manderley to like a women's college or something like that. It's so, you know, scorched earth. But that unconsciously is why the character to me still has this, like, I dreamt I went to Manderley again.
Right,
And the
right.
narration in the book is like, we travel from city to city as exiles. We try not to have any excitement in our lives. You know, we read the cricket scores or whatever. It's just like, and if you see this not good remake that came out the year of the,
the one with a couple, the Netflix one, right? A couple years
right,
ago.
right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
haven't seen it.
Yeah, and
Heard it was
Army
bad.
Hammer is so it's just like so wrong for
Yeah.
Maxim, right? I mean, he's a rich man and he comes from money, but he doesn't have, you know, British or age or
Right.
anything right
Yeah.
about him. I think that on a level of her sticking with Maxim, it's disappointing and is part of, you know, maybe a kind of cynicism on the part of like Du Maurier about what this, you know, relationship is, that the romance is, you know, it's dark, but that the impulse of the film is to explore this other side of her desire or fantasy or imagination that's really tied up with Manderley. So that
Right.
ties her to him forever.
Yeah. That's what I thought was a strong possibility. What is what's the biggest thing you'd like people to take from the book?
From my book, let me do a little pitch. Can I show it? Because I
Yes,
just,
please
you
do.
can't see it because I have my background on, but
I can see it. Yeah, actually, I think if you put it if you put it right to the
Right in
camera, it may pop out more.
right.
There we go. Oh, actually, it
No.
doesn't. I was
Oh,
wrong.
yeah, that's so interesting. No, it
It's like
likes it right
ghostly,
where
just like
I
the
am.
movie.
It needs to be my face. It needs to be my face.
Ah, there we
But
go.
so the cover art is by Frederica Massini.
That's a beautiful cover, by the way. Great. That's a great job.
Yeah, it was from the still, but the British Film Institute, you know, their Film Classics series out of Bloomsbury has both expanded in terms of, you know, kind of anything goes. It's a classic in terms of world cinema. So that's exciting. But they also have now these artist covers, and they're really different artists for different kind of, you know, threads.
Yeah.
So mine got the sort of psychological ink blot, you know,
Right.
mid-40s treatment. I think what I want to say about the movie is, or the takeaway for me for the film, is probably what we were just talking about, which is the kind of contradictions of popular culture for and about women. That there's a real excitement and pleasure in these long-lasting genres like the Gothic, in these really high-quality Hollywood films and best-selling novels, and that they're really about things that have constricted women's lives over the years, like the, you know, meeting Mr. Right, being swept off your feet by a dark stranger or whatever. But they're about why you need those kind of counterfactual imaginations, why you need those genres, because the reality is about the disempowerment of this, you know, young woman who doesn't have a family or means. They're about like kind of anger and rage, and, you know, a character like Rebecca is so compelling because she breaks the mold so thoroughly that I want to bring forward a feminist analysis. You know, it's not simple for him either. He's working with all these women. He makes not only this film, but also, you know, Notorious, which is one of his greatest films, Spellbound, even Marnie, films that are really part of Psycho, films that are really about something similar, you know, that are really true conflicts for women in terms of power in culture and in relationships, and that he's just as good as exploring those, as many other directors, despite his notorious misogyny. His women are fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting that he's always had that rep. But if you look, I mean, he had many female collaborators and many, as you said, fascinating female leads or stories. So I'm not really sure where. I mean, maybe it's the Tippi Hedren story, or I don't know where that kind of comes from, but I don't know, maybe a little more about about why people have thought that. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think, there are the ways that he treated women on set, and Janet Leigh and Psycho, and, what happens to that character is like literally overkill, right? But that representation of violence, we also learn something from it. And the next thing that happens is that her sister pops right back up and is like a gothic heroine, kind of exploring the mansion and trying to figure out once again why women have to die. So I think it just bears a lot of inquiry and attention. And just to say her name, Alma Reville or Alma Hitchcock was there in all of, in the writing, in the execution on set. So he's an interesting figure for film history. And I guess that's sort of the point, is that you would have in mid-century Hollywood an attention to women's stories and women's audiences, that yes, it was economically motivated, but that it really was powerful in a way that kind of post-studio era Hollywood, I was going to say, took a long time to achieve again, but actually I don't think it's ever returned. I mean, we have now powerful women characters in genres that are traditionally male, and those are fun to see, but you don't really have like pull out all the stops to make a consistent number of starring vehicles for women's stars that center around complex characters. You don't.
Exactly.
Maybe you do on TV, but Hollywood doesn't do it. So that was the time when Hollywood served that function too, and that's I think pretty memorable historically, and especially given that it was the 40s and it was like on the brink of pretty big demographic changes in gender and race. So so I think it's just an important movie.
And was that simply because all the men were off at war, and so they thought,
no,
or is there more to it than pushing female?
I think that we got more female stories, and some of them were really twisted, right? Because we did have this rise of all this sort of psychological, kind of complication and sort of gaslighting women into thinking that these are the stories that they wanted to see, as opposed to, maybe other ones. No, I feel like classical Hollywood, once the studio system got established, always recognized its female audience. It also had not a lot, but a significant number of women making stuff. Not in the highest level roles necessarily, but important roles, often writers. They adapted a lot of women's fiction. They just said that not only was it half the audience, but it was credited to be the audience that determined what to see. Whereas that changed in the post-studio era, when it was thought that, the biggest movie going audience is, adolescent boys, and they're the ones who are going to decide. And if they get a little older, they're the ones that are going to decide what, their dates are going to go to. Whereas the wisdom previously was, women are the consumers. They make the decisions for the home. They make the decisions for the outing. That was just taken seriously at that time. And Selznick, I don't want to say above all, but was very serious about that audience, and was super successful. That's how Gone with the Wind was the most, whether that's the legacy you want to claim, but was the most successful film.
Yeah.
So I think Rebecca is, for me, it's a really interesting film to make that argument around, because it's not an easy, it's a great film, but it's not like a simple it's not a simply affirming story at all. Like, it's a women's
Right.
story. There's all these women, they're all pretty dark or insipid. So what's that about?
Right.
That's it's interesting.
No, it absolutely is. And it makes me wonder, well, what the hell happened? Like, why did these people, well, I know, obviously the system went down and everything, but it seems like you just wouldn't think of these guys, this cigar chompers, however you want to, would have been attuned to what women would have would have wanted to see, and how important that was. For years, I mean, everything that people are, rightfully protesting and pushing for now was really existed 80 years ago, so it's kind of like, what happened, I think that's a whole other that's a whole other topic, I suppose.
And I'm not being, and again, I want to foreground that contradiction, because I don't want to be naive and say that, like, okay, yeah, we want a whole bunch of romances or, mother suffering stories either, but that recognition that those genres serve a social role, it's more trivialized now. You have to have like a different kind of female led vehicle to it has to have some irony or some action or some
yeah. No, I know, I totally agree. I was also curious, because I know you wrote about this in the book as well, was after Mrs. Danvers, shows her the room and this is where her underwear is, and that scene, immediately afterwards, I says, well, we'll never speak about what happened in that room again. Right. So do you take that as her kind of reading between the lines, and sort of being homophobic, like, how dare you, or what did you think?
I would say also very conflicted. We're never going to talk about it because you got me going.
Yeah.
I mean, it's totally like, she's like, where do I go? I only realized it this time writing about the film. I was like, wait, we never see Maxim upstairs. Like, we never see their bedroom.
That's right.
There, we know they went on this honeymoon, but we only see that in like home movies and the projector breaks. Like, it's not super convincing, the passion there. So the heart of her desire is, I want to go see what's in that room. She gets there and Danvers says, I've been waiting to show it to you. Why didn't you come before? So there is this, they're on this same wavelength, whether it's Rebecca worship or, just like sensuality. It's, it smells like Rebecca there. It's, Rebecca's theme music is playing. The wafting breeze is like, it's touching her. Every sense is activated for her there, and she's responding to it with fear, but also with, like, she's hypnotized. So so forgetting about it, like, it's just like with the Production Code Administration saying, we don't want any inference. So we're gonna, you're not gonna be able to say it directly. So anytime you mention that there's a secret, like, we're not gonna talk about this, it becomes even more loaded and more freighted. So I do think I think that there's, lesbian subtext, queer subtext that audiences can get. Yeah. And I think there's a lesbian story that is more about psychological conflict and the appeal of the feminine over the masculine, which is capricious and unknowable in the form of Maxim. So that it's like, this is the world that she's, afraid to claim. Mrs. Danvers is like, I'm going to, lay out flowers every day and kind of have this cult of the dead Rebecca. Yes. Will you join me in that? And if you won't, then maybe you could die too and make this room even more, rich with resonance.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I mean, it like she dies when she comes in there late. I've just been thinking about this lately, but when she comes in again, the heroine, when she's wearing the white dress, it's almost like they're trapped in the past because they're both wearing these like period costumes and still going through, this kind of attraction repulsion kind of thing. Eye turns from the window, sobs, and falls on the bed, and finds her face, her tears staining our pillow that Mrs. Danvers embroidered for Rebecca when she was alive. So there's just a lot of sensuality and
Yes.
And mystery, and and it's fun. It's part of the what stays with you about the film.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, like I said, I mean, it's certainly reading the book and of course talking to you now, it certainly makes me want to go watch the movie again, or watch the novel, right? So because as we've been discussing, it's such a complicated film with so many depths and layers. And the first time around, because there's so much information, like that investigation, the secrets, there's a lot of exposition. Not to put it down, but I think once you can sort of let that land on you, I think with each viewing you can pick up on so much more about the people and the details and the themes. And it's a really rich film. And of course your wonderful book just made it even richer. So
thank you.
Again, I really enjoyed it. Is there anything that you're working on now that you can share in terms of a book, or is that
well, I'm working on contemporary directors. So I'm working on US indie women directors. So I've been writing on, so I've been written quite a bit on Chloe Zhao and Kelly Reichardt. And now
I love Kelly Reichardt.
Yeah. And now I'm writing on abortion films because it's timely, and specifically Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always by Eliza Hittman.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great movie. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, fantastic. Well, Patricia, thanks again for your generous time. I really appreciate that you took the time to talk to me today. And I hope that you can come again sometime and discuss another film or another book you have either that you've written before or coming out. So great.
I would appreciate it. I'd love to. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and or listening. If you are currently listening to my YouTube channel on the audio version of the channel and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode that I have ever recorded can be found, youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. I also want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you are interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. Patreon is bonus content that I create month in and month out. And it is based on polls that I put out at the beginning of every single month, which as a member, you will have access to vote on. So if you like my work and you're interested in supporting me over on Patreon, head over to the link for full details. There now also is a thanks button that you will see right below the video next to the like and dislike and comment buttons. If you want to leave a donation to my YouTube channel, just press the thanks button and you can do so there. And lastly, if this is your first time here, or if you haven't already done so on my YouTube channel, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.